Recently found inspiration from Paul Harris, Rotary International's founder, in the following quote. And I'm sure that many of our long-standing members of this club will be familiar with this quote. Personality has power to uplift, power to depress, power to curse, and power to bless. Paul Harris, born 1868. Thank you. By presenting them with Paul Harris Fellow Recognition Pins from the Rotary Foundation. So I invite the following members to come forward. Ron Koopman, Paul Harris Fellow +2 pin. And Ron is here. Congratulations, Ron. And Sheila has your Paul Harris.
Okay, I'm going to trade places then. So I want to be in the picture.
Great. I think that's altogether fitting.
I want to be in the picture. Never miss a photo op. Okay, I'm great.
And then Jim Schmidt, Paul Harris Fellow +3 pin.
This is the fun, sir.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Jim. Thank you very much for your contributions.
And Sheila has a letter for you, Jim. Congratulations.
Okay. Yeah. I love this.
And Lee Yonker, Paul Harris Fellow +3. Lee.
Jim, we're going to do a group shot. Hey, Lee, congratulations and thank you.
Congratulations. Joel Swanson, Paul Harris Fellow +4.
Hey, Joel, thank you so much.
Congratulations, Joel. By the way, I tried doing this myself, and Sheila's assisting us
She is great.
in a wonderful way here. I can't seem to chew bubblegum and ride a bike at the same time.
We're missing one. We're going to take a group
We
shot.
are missing one. And Mark Roberts, Paul Harris Fellow +5.
Jan, why don't you come back up? We're going to take a group photo here.
And Lee. Hey, Mark. Thank you, Mark. All right. We're going to do another, oh, this is complicated.
All right, now we're
All
gonna
right,
get together
yeah,
here.
yeah, all right, yeah, right over
Push
there.
that way or go that way? This way.
By the,
Okay, this is
come
great.
on, yeah. This is fun, there's so many of us today. Yeah. Sorry. It's fun. Yeah,
Sideways.
Okay,
good. Thank you,
one
gentlemen.
more, one more.
Okay. Thank you all, thank you very much.
Today, the trustees of the Rotary Foundation and the members of our club are honored to express our appreciation to two individuals who have made substantial contributions toward improving communities both locally and internationally. Lyndon Jones sought the support of the humanitarian and educational programs of the Rotary Foundation, and its areas of focus is making a substantial difference in the lives of many people across the globe. It gives me great pleasure to announce that Lynn and Joan have been major donors of the Rotary Foundation for more than a year. We've been trying to get them here, but their schedules are pretty intense, and so today's the day. In appreciation for their investment in the future of humanity, the trustees of the Rotary Foundation wish to express their gratitude to Lynn and Joan by presenting them with this. I'm still having trouble chewing bubble gum. So Jen and Lynn, please come up, and I'd like to present you with the. Thank you. East Bristol.
Come out in front of me.
Come up.
Come up so you can pray. See everybody.
We'll finally get one. I'll let you.
Okay.
John's gonna do one more, I think.
You do one more. Okay.
Yeah, he's so bad. Let's just do some fills or anything. Are you ready?
Yeah, what
Okay.
Pat stated. Okay, so we met with the hotel management. There is a name change, but they still want to continue doing business with us. However, we signed a contract. Excuse me. It's good for 6 weeks. In this time, they're going to kind of, the management is really looking at the cost of what this costs to do business here, based on the average per person. At that point, we're gonna meet up with them and see what we can negotiate to continue meeting here. Just letting you all know, it could be a little, price bump on the per meeting if we wanna continue staying here. So we'll let you know as we know in the future what we come up with, and you all be kept informed. But we are good for the next 6 weeks. We did sign that contract, keeping everything the same as it is now. So that's what I have.
Are there any alternatives?
We always have alternatives. I'm the master of alternatives. So there are alternatives. So we need to really wait and see what they come back with.
Yeah, the fact that they didn't live up to the standard to keep DoubleTree would seem that they'd be in the worst negotiating place.
Well, the thing is that they have I'm not too sure what's going on with their business. I know that DoubleTree had some demands that they wanted them to do. That big thing going around the garbage cans is one of them. I only knew of a few things. I don't know what they expected him to do within the hotel, but that's really nothing to do with us. I want to see what we can do to continue to meet here, because this is convenient here, and I'm sure everyone here agrees. We've tried everywhere else, and although there's some fine places out there, this seemed to work out for everybody. When we took votes back then, it was kind of consensus. Everybody wanted to continue meeting at this hotel. So that's what we're trying to do. So we'll let you know. We always have alternatives. I did that many times during my year. So that's kind of why I'm involved with this. So we'll let you know. So no need to panic yet. In the back.
I'm just wondering if they're not going to be DoubleTree, are they going to be an independent,
Yes.
one-only hotel?
Yes, they are
Oh.
at this point. And they were, again, they had the DoubleTree branding, but this was always owned by the company that we wrote the check to. Is called the Good Hotel or Management Company.
LLC.
Yeah, DoubleTree.
Yeah, so they're still the same people. They just don't have that branding. So.
Thanks, JR. Yeah.
This is going to be a very interesting program. So, who is introducing Lynn?
I'm introducing.
You're introducing yourself.
I know her well.
You know who everybody is, and we all know you, Lynn. Welcome, Lynn. She's going to give us a great talk.
Today our main presenters are from Stanford Valley Care. They're talking about a very exciting program, what it means to get a certified critical care stroke program going and operational. But first I digress a little bit. 40 years ago, I naively joined a fool's expedition. A sport shop owner planned to ski down from Mount Shasta summit, 14,000 feet tall, in February. What could go wrong? 2 days out, we were marooned at 10,000 feet, in the ominously named Avalanche Gulch by fierce wind and tons of snow. Our party was forced to shelter in an igloo, vacant. Inside a note advice. This igloo was built by the Weed chapter of the Bull Goose Mountaineers. Take good care of it. It may save a Bull Goose Mountaineer's life. Due to their vision, our lives might have been saved. The Stanford Healthcare Stroke Program is our Valley's igloo. Funded, built, and led by caring visionaries, it will reduce suffering and save lives one at a time. Let's take good care of it. My 1992 stroke was life-shattering. One of the lucky persons to suffer a severe stroke, I benefited from extensive rehab and have had a fulfilling life and career. I do not dwell on this, but I know that with the currently available drugs properly given, all the suffering by my caring and determined wife, my family, friends, and co-workers would have been lessened. So the two speakers, Dr. Prashant Krishna Mohan, the medical director of neurology at Stanford Healthcare, Valley Care, is building the neurology and stroke program. He cares for patients with severe and neuro disease, strokes and neuro disease. He has been named clinical assistant professor of Stanford Neurology and Neurological Sciences. He joined Stanford as fellow in neurological critical care and stroke after residency in both internal medicine in India and neurology at the University of Kentucky. His research seeks to predictors of brain injury severity after cardiac arrest. He lives in the Bay Area with his wife and children. Shaki Sulikan, executive director of the Valley Charitable Foundation, is a nationally known leader who has raised money for universities and nonprofit. She has served as Harvard's Medical School's Director of Giving. An executive board member of both Tri-Valley Nonprofit Alliance and Arroyo Seco PTA. She lives in Livermore with her sons and her husband. Please welcome both of them as they give us this program.
Thank you so much for having us. Such a packed room. We are delighted to be here to speak about a very important topic. And thank you, Lynn and Joan, for all that you do for our community and for people worldwide, and the support you've provided to countless lives, never even knowing who you'll touch. We really appreciate your support and support of our program as well. I'll start off with a very brief overview of Stanford Healthcare Valley Care. How many of you have been to our hospital in Pleasanton? A good number of people in the room, hopefully not recently, but we are a community hospital and we will always be a community hospital. In 2015, we affiliated with Stanford Healthcare and it expanded our services. And now, as part of that connection, we are connected to a U.S. News and World Report top 10 hospital at Stanford. And as through our network, we have 13 adult specialties that are nationally ranked. Our connection has allowed Stanford physicians and Stanford specialists to also practice here. Dr. Krishna Mohan is actually one of those physicians who spends majority of his time, thanks to the support from our community here in Pleasanton, but he practices in both locations. And so we have a number of other specialties and physicians who are splitting their time. I know some people I've spoken with who are in this room who see specialists in Palo Alto are eager to have them opening their clinics here as well to avoid the long commute. I've certainly made that commute, and sometimes it can be 3 hours long. So we're happy that we are bridging that gap and adding to the services here in our community. And one of the exciting things is we also have priority transfer status to Stanford. What that means is if somebody comes to our hospital and they need anything that is above and beyond what we are as a community hospital are capable of providing them. They can be airlifted via helicopter. We have a helipad on our campus, and the Palo Alto Hospital has a helipad. It takes 17 minutes for the transfer via helicopter from here to Palo Alto. Shortly after we became a priority transfer center, we actually had a patient who needed an organ transplant to save their life, and had a successful organ transplant very quickly, and their life has been saved, and countless of their family members' lives have been touched because of that ability. And we also have been able to implement an electronic medical record. Not very exciting, but what it allows us to do is anytime a patient is within any of the Stanford locations, whether it's physicians' offices or our hospital or Palo Alto, physicians can open the same record, and there's no need for you to get a CD of your information or printouts. Remember the printouts? My son was in the NICU for 2.5 months, and I have a book this thick of printouts of his care, so no more printouts. So we're very excited to do that and ensure for seamless care. And last but not least, we've been able to add new programs and focus on innovation. So today we'll talk about one of those new programs and one of the innovative things that are happening, which is our stroke program. We launched a campaign thanks to the support from Jonah and Lynn to bring a stroke program here to our hospital. It is something that the community has tried numerous times in the past. Unfortunately, it is really hard to recruit a stroke specialist to a community hospital. So thanks to our affiliation with Stanford, we were able to get Dr. Krishna Mohan and other physicians as well, who are experts in the field, to join us. With that said, I would like to ask Dr. Krishna Mohan to tell us what a stroke is.
Sure. First, again, thank you everyone for giving us the opportunity to come here and talk about something that I'm really passionate about. And as Shaki mentioned, we are really excited for the amount of enthusiasm and the support shown by our community. So going back to Shaki's question, so what is a stroke? So stroke is basically the brain equivalent of a heart attack. It's any kind of a brain injury where your brain doesn't get good blood flow for a certain period of time. If it happens to the heart, we all know it's the chest pain and the heart attack. The same process essentially happens in the brain, and we just call it a stroke.
Can you tell us the different types of strokes?
Yeah, so when we talk about stroke, most often we refer to what we call the blockage kind of a stroke or an ischemic stroke, which is basically there's an occlusion or blockage of the blood flow getting into the brain. That is by far the most common. About 80 to 85% of the strokes are the blockage kind of strokes. Now there is another second kind of stroke which is actually equally dangerous, sometimes even more. It's about 13 to 15% of the times. That is where one of the arteries or the blood vessels in your brain gets weak over time, and then one fine day it just ruptures and blood leaks out of the brain. It's called the hemorrhagic stroke or the bleeding kind of stroke.
Thank you. How many people in the United States are having strokes each year?
So it's a pretty staggering number. Most of us don't realize how common strokes are. We all know strokes are bad, but it's actually much more common than we all think. Every year, about 800,000 people have a stroke. Just to give a perspective, that's like one stroke every 40 seconds. And so the 20 minutes I'm talking here, like you can imagine how many patients across the US are having a stroke. And about 1 in 10, like every 4 minutes, one person actually dies of a stroke.
And I understand it's the leading cause of disability.
Yeah, so stroke used to be the third leading cause of death nationwide. It is still the third leading cause of death in California. But nationwide, with improvements in stroke care, the mortality has improved. So it's down to like the fifth leading cause of death, still still a big deal. But what has happened because of the improved survival is we have a large percentage of stroke survivors who are left with a lot of disability. And stroke is by far the leading cause of long-term disability in the US.
Could you speak a little louder?
Oh, sure.
And move
Yeah.
up closer here.
Okay, got it.
I can't hear you.
Thank you for letting us know. So can you tell us how to identify a stroke?
Yeah, so it's I know stroke sounds like very scary and it's like anything to do with the brain is like a mystery, but in terms of like identifying stroke symptoms, it's actually pretty straightforward. I like to use this mnemonic called Be Fast. It kind of stresses the value of time and also identifies the most common stroke symptoms you need to be aware of. So B stands for balance. Anytime someone has an abrupt loss of balance, difficulty kind of walking or falling over, that's a huge sign that they're possibly having a stroke. The E stands for eyes. And eyes, blindness not so much. With eyes it's more that people will have difficulty seeing one half of their vision. Like they would either not be able to see the right half or the left half. And then they may also have trouble moving their eyes. Like they can only look towards one side. They cannot move their eyes to the other. So that's the E, stands for eyes. And then the F is for facial droop, which most of us are familiar with. If someone has like a crooked mouth, like when you see them, most of us are immediately thinking stroke. The A stands for arm or leg weakness or numbness. Again, something that most of us are aware of. If people are not able to use one side, one half of their body, you're thinking stroke. The S stands for speech. Now, most of us are familiar with like the slurry speech, as people call it. That's a common sign of stroke. But even more important is to look at the content of the speech. Like, what are they talking? Are they making sense? Are they able to understand what you're saying? Are they able to repeat things that we are saying? So it's the language function, as we call it. So the S stands for both the slurry component and as well as the content of the speech. And the last one is the T, which is always time. Never lose time. Anytime you suspect someone you know of is having a stroke, please call 911 and also please note the time of onset. That little piece of information is by far the most important information that as a family member or as a friend or a colleague that you can provide to the medical professionals that will help determine treatment. So be fast.
You mentioned time, so can you walk us through a little more about why time is of the essence for stroke patients?
Yeah, so we like to say time is brain, with like every second, every passing minute, there's more and more irreversible brain injury. So when people are having a stroke, we actually have a window of time where if we can intervene, we will be able to reverse or at least limit some of the major damages from a stroke. So just to give perspective, like if we can speed up this process from identification of stroke to the time when someone receives treatment by like about 15 minutes, for every 15 minutes that we save, you can see like we can actually save 4 more lives. About a good number of them will be able to be independent, and about 7 or 8 patients will be able to discharge home from the hospital rather than going to a long-term care or a rehab facility.
Thank you. I just got a quick question, and we'll do that before we move on, but I was asked, what is a mini stroke?
Great, yeah, so I'm glad you asked. So it's common for someone to hear these words called mini strokes, TIAs, silent strokes. So when someone usually refers to mini strokes, it's something called as a transient ischemic attack, or what we commonly call as TIAs in medical terms. What it is it's essentially the person presents like they've had a stroke. You can see any of the BFAST symptoms. For all practical reasons, it looks like they're having a stroke. But then usually what happens is our body is able to take care of the symptoms or the blockage that's causing the stroke. And so most often you'll see by the time they reach the hospital or the ED, most of the symptoms have already gone away. It's really important, even if the symptoms go away, to get to the hospital soon, because what it tells us is it's just a warning sign. Your body's trying to tell you, hey, there's something going on, you're trying to have a stroke, better get checked out. And for people who have a TIA or a mini stroke, their risk of having another stroke in the next few days to weeks is extremely high, anything as high as 20% within like the first 7 days. So I would, even by the time you get to the hospital, if your symptoms have all gone away, you would still see me recommend that you actually get admitted to the hospital so we can run a few tests and see why this happened. So I'm glad someone brought up that question.
Thank you. I was surprised to learn that only 22% of stroke patients actually reach a hospital to receive medical care in time to reduce serious illnesses. Can you talk briefly why that happens, or why such a small percentage of folks?
Yeah, so as I said, most of our treatments that we have for stroke are very time dependent. And some of you might have heard numbers like 4.5 hours. So basically, from the time someone has stroke symptom onset to the time where we are allowed, or where we can safely give that IV medicine that you might have heard as clot busting medicine or alteplase that tries to limit the damage, we have at the most 4.5 hours. It's really 3 hours for most patients, that's FDA approved. In an additional subset of patients, we can extend it up to 4.5 hours. And that is all the time we have to give this IV medicine. And if you think about it, even though it sounds like a lot, 4.5 hours is actually not much at all. For someone to develop a stroke, identify the symptoms, get to the hospital, and for us to have the time to run some of the scans and blood work before we decide to give that medicine, that's actually very little time. And one of the big reasons why we have not been able to, in stroke field, give this clot busting medicine to a lot of patients is because the delay in getting to the hospital. Only about 1/5 of our patients get to the hospital. And one of the main reasons is people tend to wait it out. Like you notice that you wake up and your arm is numb or you can move it, we're like, well, maybe I'll just wait and shake it off, or maybe I can sleep it off, I'll wake up and see. So by the time they realize that they have to go to the hospital, it's already past the 3 to 4 hours. And again, a lot of us, our first inclination when you're sick is to like get our family to drive us to the hospital. This is one situation where I would say, if you're in doubt, please call 911. The reason being, when you call 911 with potential stroke symptoms, what the EMS does is they will alert the nearest stroke center before they even bring the patient. So by the time you reach the hospital, the stroke team at any of the certified stroke centers, they all have like a stroke response team. So by the time the patient reaches the hospital, the team is ready, the CT scanner is blocked, like the lab people are ready to go, and everyone is literally like waiting for the patient at the doorstep. So that saves like a good 20-25 minutes of delay that we can avoid. But if you were to drive your family member into the hospital saying that they have stroke symptoms, it doesn't give us the time. It's like after you show up and announce yourself, we have to scramble around to gather our team. So it's very, very, very important that you actually get 911 involved and come in via ambulance. So that way, like the hospitals have like advance notice about a potential stroke patient coming in.
Thank you. Are there risk factors for stroke?
Yeah, so if you remember the first question we spoke about, it's like stroke is kind of the brain equivalent of a heart attack. So any risk factor you can think of for causing heart attacks can essentially cause stroke. So about 80% of strokes are preventable, meaning if we can take care of these risk factors, there's a very high likelihood that we might be able to prevent a stroke. So high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, obesity, these are by far the most common. Now there are a small percentage of risk factors which we call non-modifiable, meaning those are things we don't have control over, like you're born a certain gender, we age over time, you belong to a certain ethnicity. Those are the non-modifiable risk factors. But about 80% of the strokes, you can see we have one of these risk factors, or in many cases, almost all of these risk factors that they haven't taken care of.
Thank you. I know you already spoke about the TPA and the blood clots and clot busting medication. Can you talk very briefly about the other type of treatments we have available.
Yeah, so for the vast majority of stroke patients, the main gold standard treatment, as we call it, is the IV medicine. It's been around for like little over 20 years. It is still what like 80% of stroke patients, if they get to the hospital in time, will qualify for. In a small percentage of patients, we can actually do a more advanced procedure. It's called a thrombectomy. So it's essentially like a hard cath where, the person doing the procedure goes in through your groin, passes a wire all the way up to your brain, and pulls the clot out that's causing the stroke. Now, this is a fairly advanced treatment. It's actually been around for like at least 10 to 15 years. The problem was it wasn't widely accepted because as a medical field, we were having trouble proving that that treatment was superior to the clot-busting medicine. And we had trouble identifying who's the right patient for this procedure. Like if 5 people were to have stroke, all similar kinds, not everyone responds the same to this treatment. So now we actually have a way, through years of research, and one of the pioneers in this area was actually at Stanford Stroke. They published a large clinical trial like early part of 2018, where we've devised a imaging method where we can actually precisely identify who among those 5 patients will benefit most from this procedure. And for patients who qualify for this procedure, the odds of us getting them back to close to their baseline is like 1 in 2. It's like 50%. It's like, I know it may not mean a lot, but in medical field, getting someone a 1 in 2 chance is actually huge. It's nowhere, the heart attack and the stenting doesn't come anywhere close to the kind of benefit this procedure can provide.
Thank you. And I'm looking at the clock. It's really helpful to have a clock right up here. And I know that in 5 more minutes, we generally don't include a video, and we are, so we're just going to skim very quickly on this. Our hope is to become a primary stroke center. We're well on our way to becoming a primary stroke center, thanks to the generosity of the community and the campaign that we have. We had $1 million campaign to launch different aspects of the program. You've probably read in The Independent some components of that. And we now have our teleneurology program live, and we have our stroke alerts have gone live. We've had 2 stroke patients since December 17th, and those are people who have walked into our hospital with stroke-like symptoms that we've been able to treat. And Dr. Krishna Mohanand, our stroke coordinator, are working very hard to gather the data that we need in order to submit to the Joint Commission to become a primary stroke center so we can begin accepting ambulances. We're really excited that our community responded to our campaign and has funded the acute needs of the community, the acute care needs of the community, and we hope to continue fundraising so we can do the support services, so post-discharge rehabilitation and physical therapy, occupational therapy, etc. With that, we'll just move to our video.
Years ago, I was very active with soccer, hiking, skiing, and I was playing slow fit softball, tagging up from third base to home. Slipped on the home plate. I was wearing cleats, of course, being an old baseball player, and I crashed into a chain link fence going full speed, which eventually caused a dissection of the carotid artery, and a couple of months later, I had a severe stroke. 5 o'clock in the morning. At that time, I was able to go to Valley Care Hospital and get some kind of coverage, some kind of care. But it wasn't the expert care that we really needed. And unfortunately, I lost a lot of time.
what a lot of people maybe don't understand about stroke is that the time to care is really critical. And that's why having a stroke center within a community is important, because if you have to travel outside of the community, you know, that takes another 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes to get to where you can get treatment. That window can close, and your opportunity to have a maximal treatment and best long-term outcome may not be available.
For every 15-minute delay in getting treatment, there's a much higher risk of mortality, there's a much higher risk of people being disabled, and much lower odds of people being independent at the end of their hospitalization.
When I heard that we had the chance to have a stroke center,
Yes. Because he's good at going into the pain and coming out the other side.
so when Shaki came and said to me, you know, we have a chance to do this, I thought hard, and we donated a certain amount, $100,000, and I talked to my wife. And realized
Yeah, you realized how important it was to you.
yeah, then we could do more.
Yes. And
So
how,
we did this challenge.
how important it was to you, but also to the whole community to have a solution. Because if you get to cure within a very short period of time, we understand you have no symptoms at all.
What would be so great about having a stroke program here is we could take that same community feel that we have and really see people through this life-changing experience that they have. You know, they come in and their deficits may lead them to not be able to walk or to feed themselves, and then to take them from that crucial time right after they have that stroke to see them all the way through that process to being able to then function as a meaningful life back in the community, I think would be so empowering for us and necessary because I think that they deserve access to those resources.
I look now at what we can do and what chances we have now to do this great Stanford Valley Care Center for stroke. And I now realize that this is something that the entire community should have.
We're so grateful to donors from our community because every single piece of support that comes in is there for equipment and tools and resources and training to help these people that come to us who have this life-changing event of a stroke to then directly impact their care and their progression and their return to life in our community.
This is part of being a community. You do what needs to be done, and we can do it. So I'm just so happy that Stanford Valley Care is doing something that we can be part of.
All right.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I think, would you be able to stay for Q&A after the meeting, or do we? I think we have time for one or two questions. But before I put the hands up, I would like to thank Joan and Lynn for their generosity and their courage in pursuing this venture for a stroke center.
I would also like to thank Lynn for his willingness to share his personal story as somebody who has been myself in the back of an ambulance counting seconds to ensure that my life would be saved, although not from a stroke, but a similar time-sensitive issue. I know how vulnerable one can be in sharing that information publicly, so thank you for doing that. I know earlier you didn't want to say a few words, but if you would like to say a few words now.
We'll take the mic over there, Sheila.
I guess the big thing is so many people worry about what will people think about calling an ambulance. All I can say is, if you even think that something is happening, call an ambulance. Remember, time counts, and anytime you delay, you are hurting yourself, your family, your friends, your coworkers, and everyone. So please listen to what the symptoms are and act as fast as you can. Time is brain, as everybody says. Thank you for attending this briefing, and if you have any questions, maybe we can have one or two more questions.
Yes, we have time for one or two questions. Hal?
Just a quick clarification, I noticed on the last bit of the video, it talked about the campaign ended on December 31st, but I presume there's still opportunity to donate, that this is an ongoing effort to support.
I did not pay him to say that. Our campaign, the official, very public campaign did end December 31st, and at that time we had to make some decisions about which aspects of the programs would be funded. Time is of the essence, but yes, if you are interested, you can still contact us, and we are raising funds.
Barbara?
If, let's say, my husband's having a stroke and we're at home, and I called 911, is there anything I can do before the ambulance gets there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So,
Mike?
Generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend giving any medicines or aspirin or things like that that we are told to do for heart attacks. It's really about, the most important piece of information you can give us is like really the time of onset, and then kind of stay with them and try to speed up this process, really. We generally recommend not to give them anything to eat or drink, because a lot of times, if patient is really having a stroke, they'll invariably have trouble swallowing. So we could make things worse by they could actually choke or develop more complications. So really stay with your family member, notice what the symptoms are, let the EMS people know what it is. And very important, if you can have the time of onset and the list of medications that they're on, that will probably be the most important piece of information we can get in addition to the symptoms.
No ice?
Nothing by mouth, no.
No.
Yeah.
You mentioned that California hasn't dropped in its fraction of stroke sufferers who die. Why is that?
It's a little bit more hard to say. When we look at the stroke mortality, it really depends on not just, we are just in the Bay Area, but there's a lot of rural areas too in our California, and there are not too many good stroke centers outside of these urban settings. So access to healthcare would probably be a big reason. So it's pretty, what we call it multifactorial, the reasons for stroke mortality not coming down. Definitely access to healthcare is going to be one big cause, and that's one of the main reasons we are trying to kind of have, as many stroke centers as we possibly can to every center of state.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much. This was very important. I have two things for you to do. These are both have medicinal qualities. So you can decide which of you gets what. It's a beautiful bottle of wine from Bed Creek. It's a nice red wine, good for you, and some nice virgin olive oil. So you can decide who gets what. But I know there's medicinal purposes there. So, and then the last is to draw the winning ticket number for our drawing. I'll read the number for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you ready? 263009, and there's a whole $51 in there because somebody won it. Oh my gosh, you win again? Oh boy. Well, thank you everybody. This has been a